Get this out of the way. And Matt, you are good to go.
Okay, we have a few more minutes. I appreciate your being here early, but
Hang on.
I want to give a few more people time. We can never tell, since it's sort of.
If for some reason it stops, it's because you clicked on this. So you have to just go back over, you know how that works.
Last time we had that 4 or 5 people here.
What
And
was the focus?
went ahead finally. There must have been 12 or 5. So,
I'm not in any rush at all, this is not last of the day.
okay. Let's see who's on. We should see who's online.
Just make sure too,
Right here, people.
Sitting here, we're just gonna sit around and talk. I'm not doing a presentation.
make sure too, I guess at the end, be sure to tell them that they haven't signed in. So.
Yes. I usually do, and I try to capture it, and I tell the people online that's their email address. Even if they sign it with something else, we need that type of materials. How do I never remember, how do I get the,
Well, stay on this screen. What do you want
oh,
to do?
yeah, all right, I want to see, yeah, I don't want to lose his
I
notes.
gotta click so that this stays so you can do this. So
Yeah,
what do
I
you
want to see, I just want to
Attendance?
see who's online and make sure that they can hear. Okay, good.
I did all the training today.
Okay.
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 The HSIS requires.
We're going to wait a couple more minutes for, before we start. I just want to make sure, can those of you who are online hear us and see the slide on the screen? You can unmute yourselves and tell me. Because we do need to hear you if you have questions, so.
This is Kevin. I can hear you.
Great. Thank you. And I guess if you can, the rest of the people can too. The way we're set up, we can't easily keep the remote people visible to us. So I think the best thing to do, our speaker will let you know if he wants questions in the middle or if he wants you to wait till the end. But I think the best thing to do is to probably just jump in with your questions as if you were here in person, because we can't always monitor the chat either. So that's why I want to make sure we can hear you. And I did hear Kevin fine, so that's good. And I am, okay. Anyway, we will wait about another couple of minutes. See more people coming on remote than.
I can see people.
Yeah, that's good. And then people who keep coming on. I'm concerned that one of the people broke me out, so this may be locked in somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to be electronic.
Yeah, I mean, they have that scanner.
Not periodically that might be able to scan bars.
Yeah. It'll just keep a backlog. I mean, instead of everyone typing in all their stuff, it's just the.
What Brian said is that he used to have it where he had your name in there before, and
okay.
just check it off. But he said that actually took him more time.
Oh, really? Oh, like searching around.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll start because we have about 8 people online, and it might be better if you two moved up just a little bit, because then if you have questions, the other people can hear. Because they may not hear you from back there. Okay, I think we will start, and there's actually more of you online than are here in person. So, welcome everybody. This is actually our 4th session, if you count the materials from last week in the series. And this one is going to be targeted generally in terms of access of clinical information, but also specifically here at UAB. So I know some of you may be not from UAB, and there still may be, if you're one of the partner sites, there still may be opportunities for you to access some of the data as well. And we can talk about that. Are you going to talk about partners access?
A little bit.
Yeah, there may be people from the partner sites, CCTS partner sites on here. Want to remind those of you who are online, we do need your email address because we send you materials after each of the seminars. So if you didn't sign in with your email address, with an accurate email address, just email it to me. Just eberner, EBERNER @uab.edu, and make sure that I have it so that I can send you the materials. So our session today, as I said, was on accessing clinical data at UAB, the why and the how. And Mr. Matt Wyatt, who is an assistant director of our CCTS Informatics group, and who also is working at the UAB Informatics Institute, will be giving this presentation. So this is Matt Wyatt, and they'll begin.
Thank you. So in terms of people who are, I'll just sort of preface UAB for folks versus UAB partners. So some of the things that I talk about are very oriented towards self-service functions within UAB and services for UAB investigators, but please don't take that as an indication that this isn't something that is relevant to anyone else. Any collaborator that we have across the partner networks can get laser ID-like credentials and do anything and everything that we can. Anyone who is on an IRB protocol at UAB and is certainly able to consume many of the services we have in the Enterprise Data Warehouse team. If you have any questions, come on in, and I'm happy to give you whatever can support your research. So I typically like to first have people raise their hands. Sorry, I forgot my required joke. Here's some of my favorite ICD-10 codes. And all of those are real except for the last one, and the last one is specific to one of my job functions. I definitely, my favorite go-to is sucked into a jet engine, subsequent occurrence. For those lucky enough to have survived being sucked into a jet engine, but unlucky enough to have it happen again. I'm not sure how that would happen, but it's real. So questions for the audience, and for those of you who are online, just go ahead and raise your hand. The physical activity is good, and I'll assume your responses. So I'm interested in who is interested in patient data, who is interested in clinical data that is generated during healthcare delivery at UAB, who is interested in randomized controlled trials, prospective clinical research studies, finding patients, anyone who is interested in doing retrospective analysis of EHR data or data warehouse data, anything from clinical operations, And if you raise your hand for any of those things, I'm for you. If you didn't, think about someone in your department, division, a mentor, a colleague, a student, anyone who does meet that definition or have those interests. And as I'm talking, think about how these things can help them and send them to me. So big picture, what we're going to talk about today is basically the progression of clinical data generated primarily within UAB health system to support the research enterprise. And we're talking about a few things. Here we have Cerner Impact is our electronic health record. That is the core of clinical documentation within UAB. Data from there goes into our enterprise data warehouse every night. So every night we have a little bit more data in our data warehouse that is there specifically for supporting secondary use of that data, whether it's for operational or administrative reporting, quality reporting, or in my interests for research. We also have a system that I'll describe called I2B2. It is some describe it as a research data warehouse. I typically describe it more as a purpose-specific tool that is a self-service function. It is a self-service tool that anybody can log into and ask questions without having to go into the full enterprise data warehouse or having to go to an enterprise data warehouse analyst to ask those questions. Its entire purpose is to get a subset of data directly in the hands of people who are interested in research so they can ask their own questions, download their own data, and use it in a variety of places within the research process. And I'll talk about those places. So as a researcher, it has long been very typical and is still typical to go to somebody and say, hey, I need some data. That is a enterprise data warehouse analyst. That's my team, the research data team of our EDW. And that exists, and if anything doesn't fall within what I talk about here in I2B2 or in anything else, you can still follow that little arrow to an EDW analyst, ask a question, and we'll go find data for you. However, we are also going to talk about I2B2 as a self-service function that you can go to anytime, day or night, and ask questions directly. So for some purposes, it won't do everything, but for some purposes, it is a much more direct capacity to go answer questions in a way that has not been available really at UAB prior. So what we're going to talk about is both that relationship and I2B2. And so hopefully folks have at least looked at some of the preparatory material. There was a case study that would have given you at least a hint of what I2B2 does. I flip-flopped around whether to provide an overview of I2B2 first so that you had that in context for this slide, but then I decided you probably were supposed to have looked at that a little bit anyway, so I'll do this first. So these are the various parts of the research process, starting with early on feasibility assessments and hypothesis exploration. And going around that are various different places within the research process or different functions within the research process. It's not strictly a one-way arrow going around. It's just more bits and pieces or different things that can, different parts of research, different areas of research that we have tools to support. And the things that are in the middle are those tools. And we can mix and match those to satisfy whatever part of the research process you're in and whatever need we can provide or we can satisfy with clinical data. And I'll just go around this, this chart and sort of describe the tools that serve each function. So for feasibility assessment, do we have the population to meet a study's needs? Honestly, the way that has been done at many large academic medical centers, including at UAB, and I've had 2 center directors of very large centers tell me, they just guess. The PI just says, yep, I think we have enough people to do that, or I don't know, yeah, we probably do. And that's not ideal. A better thing is to go log into I2B2, run a query and say, how many patients do we have that have this diagnosis, have ever had a lab value, this particular lab value in this range, and have either had or not had this medication. And you get a specific number. So you don't have to just guess and say, yes, I think we have 48 of those. And much of the experience is that those guesses are really not very accurate. And the result of that is we either overestimate our ability to enroll and aren't successful in the study. We think we don't have the patient population to participate in something and miss out on opportunities, etc. Hypothesis exploration. So there's by policy, one should not go explore in our electronic health record for research purposes or for just hypothesis exploration, for playing around, for just trying to get a feel for research questions. That's not something that is appropriate because the IRB doesn't say you're allowed to do that. Access to the EHR is for a specific IRB approved protocol or for clinical or administrative operations. However, I2B2 is perfectly reasonable to explore. Go play. Ask 25 questions and see if people meeting these criteria have a different demographic profile than people meeting these criteria. What is the prevalence of an elevated lab test for people on this medication versus this medication? Just go play. This is a perfectly reasonable place. I2B2 does not provide for PHI. You can't see who the patients are. You can't see real identifiers. So it is fully available to go do hypothesis exploration, and you can ask questions over and over and over, ask lots of different questions, and refine your research questions in a pretty reasonable way. So, and I'll show you a couple of examples in writing proposals. So it could be as simple as proposed enrollment sections. We have this number of people who we expect to be able to enroll in a particular protocol. It could be preliminary data. So you can actually look at multiple populations and say, this population has these characteristics and this population has these characteristics. And people have been pretty successful at using either aggregate or limited data set data from I2B2 in grant preparation and proposal preparation. If I2B2 can't answer the question, you can also come to the Enterprise Data Warehouse team and say, this is my proposal, I'm looking for preliminary data, and whether it's IRB approved or preparatory to an IRB, we can still help you with that preparatory data, with that supporting data for a research proposal. So I'm not really going to talk about this today, but there are I2B2, there are a couple of systems that are overlaying I2B2 that will allow us to approach other institutions, partner networks, specifically people like Emory, Arkansas, MUSC, to not just look for patients within our UAB community, but to also look for potential collaborators in other institutions. And so there have been discussions with folks in Louisiana, in Kentucky, and we have just now officially joined a network that is really a national network at the NIH to really do everything that we can do, or many of the things that we can do with I2B2 across a national network. So if we only have 12 patients that meet certain criteria, and that's not sufficient to approach a study, we can identify 2, 3, 4, 10 other places around the country that also have populations of patients, and we can promote collaborations that way. So limited data set and really real life study data sets. I2B2 can provide not full PHI, but what is defined as a HIPAA limited data set. So it has real dates, it has real zip codes, but it doesn't have name, medical record number, it doesn't have address, phone number, email address, etc. It doesn't have a real encounter number. But unless you need to actually pick up the phone and call the patient or try to do recruitment and identify patients by medical record number, you can download self-service today without any intervention, no IRB submission, no going to ask anyone for permission. Once you've logged into I2B2, you can download pretty robust data sets. If you find a population of 50 patients who are of interest to you, you can download every medication for those 50 patients. You can download every lab result, every visit, every allergy. You can download a lot of data on those patients. And I'll show an example later where people have done really full research on just the limited data set data and been published. And the benefit of that is that it is self-service. We have already gone through the process of working with the IRB and the health system to make sure that we can release this data really in this self-service way with a very low barrier to entry. The IRB has automatically exempted all of this data as part of logging into I2B2. You have agreed to the appropriate use of this data, and you can go do this all the time, every day, without having to call anyone. Now, if that's not sufficient, if there is information that you need that isn't in I2B2, say for example, there's a particular clinical event that is documented in a particular power note in a particular clinic, and it's not really something that we found as broadly valuable to the community, so we haven't pulled that into I2B2, then so be it. We can still go get that for you. If you need to pick up the phone and call patients, if you need to know who the patients are and when their future visits are and need to go recruit them, we can. You can't do that via I2B2. You have to do that because there has to be human mediation, verifying the IRB protocol, and we can provide you all that data. Now the good thing is, if you start with an I2B2 patient set and say, here are my 400 patients that I'm interested in, here's my IRB protocol that says I can get all of this PHI on them. You say, I ran this query in I2B2 yesterday and here's its name. Can you send me the medical record number on all those patients? I will say yes, assuming the IRB says yes, and we can send it to you, probably that day. Don't quote me on that, maybe a week. Usually 2 days. And actually, so that's recruitment data sets. But if it's also for really full research data sets, I mean, we sent something to someone a couple of days ago that was millions and millions of records. It was medication records for a pretty large set of patients, and they're doing population studies for a large national study. So that one is actually preparatory to research, but they couldn't quite ask the question in the right way in I2B2, and because it was a very large data set, they had to come to us and we can provide that. IRB approved research data sets, PHI, I think I've more or less just covered that one. But again, that's not I2B2. That's because I2B2 is specifically IRB approved only to provide limited data set. That is something that the Enterprise Data Warehouse team can provide for you. This is, so there's a very common model for doing manual chart abstraction at UAB. And it is among the things that frustrates me more than just about anything. I hear stories of how many hours people take to go manually do chart abstraction so they can take lab data from the EHR and put it into their research data set. Don't do that. If you know anybody who's doing that, tell them not to do that. Send them to me. So if you have an IRB approved study and you're doing prospective data collection and you have 100 patients and you want additional information from the EHR that exists as part of normal clinical practice, whether that's comorbidities, give me 100 medical record numbers, I'll give you every ICD-10, SNOMED, and ICD-9 code, everything on the problem list, every documented diagnosis that they have. If you want labs, give me 100 medical record numbers, I'll give you every creatinine that those patients have ever had at UAB. And throw that to your statistician, and that's much, much, much better than doing manual chart abstraction. Now this we're not really going to talk about much at all, but in addition to being able to, from UAB, look to other communities for patient populations, we also have the capacity to allow other communities to look to UAB to identify potential populations. So specifically, the Shrine Networks is a one-on-one or group collaboration, so we can look at them, they can look at us. TriNetX is a more pharma-oriented, where pharmaceutical research companies largely are looking across the country and going through this TriNetX collaborative, of which we're a partner, and they come to us and say, we see that you have 45 patients who meet the criteria for this study. Are you interested in participating? And we've gotten quite a number of invitations. Sometimes it works out for us and it's something that is of interest to us. Sometimes it's not, but they are bringing opportunities to UAB and coming to us and saying, it looks like you have this population. We would like you to be a participant in this study. We would like you to be a recruitment site for this study. And what we can do from that is if somebody at UAB is interested, if they find 45 patients and say, we think this is a population and would like you to participate, we can give the investigator here at UAB those 45 patients very, very easily and let them look at all the clinical data, try to recruit those patients, future visits for those patients so they can see which ones are, and this is the case for any of these patient sets. If you want to know who's scheduled for next week, if they have a visit scheduled next week, we can show you that. So you don't have to just put a sign in the hallway or in the elevator. If you have a potential population for recruitment, we can give you the visit information, including if you have a population of 20 patients and 4 of them are scheduled for visits next week, we can tell you that. So, long story short, there are a variety of places within the research process, or a variety of different types of research that can take advantage of clinical data. There's a huge amount of structured clinical data collected in normal clinical practice. We can facilitate you having access to that data for research purposes, whether it's in preparation for your research, in recruiting, in actually conducting your research, in doing replication of research, looking at outcomes, looking at meta-analysis of population data. Whatever your research interests, if you feel like you want to find patients or look at patient data, you can do that at UAB. So, any questions before I sort of jump in from there?
Matt, did you mention, I don't know if you repeat my question.
I will.
Did you mention the idea about checking to see if you really can do a clinical trial as one of the...
So the question was, talking about
whether you have enough,
whether you have enough patients to actually conduct a clinical trial. And so that's probably talking specifically about I2B2. That is really part of its core purpose, is how many patients do we have at UAB that meet these criteria? And the most common use for that is, do we have enough patients to fulfill the recruitment requirements for a funding agency or a sponsor, or do we have enough patients that I, as an independent investigator, can actually conduct a study? So that is a core part of I2B2 as a tool specifically, but also as the enterprise data warehouse as a service function and service entity, that's a very common thing. And I would highly encourage people to do that. Think about whether or not we have the population, and we can help answer those questions. So don't just guess. Any other questions online? I don't see anything in the chat.
I told him not to do the chat.
Yeah. Hearing none, with a sad tone in my voice, I will slowly move on to the next section. As I go through this, by all means, stop me as we go along.
Them actually tried the case study too.
Yeah. So I'm going to start describing I2B2 a bit, and I'll probably hop around a good bit. I have mostly slides. I can go show actually logging into the live system. Although I'm kind of hesitant to do that, not because it's not real and it's not there, but because there's absolutely no way in half an hour that you're going to really learn how to use I2B2 or how to navigate I2B2. It'll probably more frustrate you and confuse you about what button to push. And you don't need to know what button to push today. You need to know why you want to go push buttons today. So hopefully people were allowed that, or were able to actually go log into the demo instance of I2B2 at Partners by either show of voice or chiming in. Who was able to actually do that? And any initial responses to the I2B2 user interface and how it worked? Hearing none, with a sad tone in my voice, I'll talk about I2B2. So I2B2 is its primary purpose is as a visual drag and drop user interface to build queries. If you can express something in Boolean logic based on facts that actually exist in the clinical record, you can represent that query more or less in I2B2. If it can handle some pretty complex queries with some temporal constraints. It can handle a lot of things. What I'm going to talk about is just really the very basic query functions. So you can search for terms. You can navigate terms by hierarchy. And then if you look at the groups within I2B2, you basically say how many patients have, in this case, this particular ICD-10 code and one or more of these medications. And the answer, 25,776. And this is very similar to the actual case study. If you did that, you would have gotten a very small number, like in the teens at most. We have 25,776 as of last year. So you can find concepts, whether it's a diagnosis or it's a particular medication, an allergy, a biospecimen, at least in some collections, a radiology orders. You can look for a variety of information, and I actually have a slide that shows you what information is in I2B2. And you can build that query dynamically. If you want to say does not have a particular medication, you can do that. If you want to say has this medication and this lab result, you can do that. If you want to say this lab result and this medication on the same encounter, you can do that. If you want to say patients who've had a visit in the last year, you can do that. You can limit based on demographics. You can limit based on types of visits, whether it's inpatient or outpatient. You can really build a query based on a pretty wide variety of general clinical characteristics, and what you get out of that. And you can limit to particular values, whether it's a particular dose of a medication or an age range or a particular lab result, or in this case a BMI greater than or equal to something or less than or equal to something. So what you can get back is aggregate results, so you have a numeric answer. You can also get back general characteristics of the population, and that's age, race, gender, etc. You can easily get back information that details what kind of query, the criteria for your query, and breakdowns of age, race, and gender. And I've seen a lot of people just take this information as is and copy and paste it into proposed enrollment sections and describing the characteristics of their recruitment population. Particularly if we want to say we have a large African American population, if we have an age distribution that is beneficial for a particular study, etc. You can also download limited data sets. So after you find your population of 50 patients, you can download basically any type of facts that you want from I2B2. So if you want to download all of the lab values for your population of 50 patients, you can do that. And you get back in this, it's not necessary to really look at the details of this, but just take away from this that you can get real data, CSV files, Excel files, any sort of delimited files, and you can get very detailed data. Now what you get is not identifiers. It is medical record numbers, and even I2B2 identifiers are replaced with something that is specific to this download. That is how we accommodate the IRB and are allowed to provide this as a self-service function without any additional review. Because we don't really tell you who the patients are, but the internal identifiers are consistent when you download data for this patient set, so you can tie all of this together. You won't know patient 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is Matt Wyatt, but you will know every lab value that's associated with patient 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Same for medication, same for diagnoses, problems, procedures, etc. So what's in I2B2? Big picture, it includes most of the UAB clinical enterprise. So it is the hospital, Kirkland Clinic, all of the outlying clinics that are associated with Health Services Foundation. It is UAB Highlands, it's UAB Women and Infant Center. Some things that it is not, things like UAB Medical West. They aren't integrated with our systems from an electronic health record perspective or an enterprise data warehouse perspective, so their data is not in I2B2. iFoundation, VA, any of our partner networks are not yet incorporated into I2B2. One that I skipped is Children's of Alabama. They are actually in the process of implementing I2B2 as well. They have meaningfully started that. They're installing I2B2, pulling their clinical data, and we're partnering with them on that.
We have 2 people from Children's on remotely now.
Awesome. So Dr. Berner just said there are folks from Children's on, so congratulations. You are on the road to having I2B2. And we've been working with folks there for really a good while in looking at what the advantages of I2B2 and how to approach I2B2, and are very interested in collaboration. We have a overlapping population, and while that may pose some difficulty because we are 2 separate legal entities, we certainly can facilitate from an honest broker, from a data steward perspective, working with them to find data sets that cross our boundaries, or just helping them implement I2B2 so that you can use similar tools to consume clinical data from Children's of Alabama. So what's in I2B2? It's not everything in our electronic health record. There's just an unreasonably large amount of information collected in clinical practice. And not all of it is really able to easily be represented in I2B2 in order to be useful, in order to be understandable. So we can put anything we would like in I2B2. If there's a particular thing that's collected in clinical practice and you want us to put it in I2B2, tell me what it is and we'll put it in I2B2. If you want your own little section in I2B2 that says so-and-so study data, and you want these things that are collected on these power notes in I2B2, no problem. Example is we've done that with, where's rheumatology? So rheumatology procedure billing data. That is project specific. Someone wanted that in I2B2. We put it in I2B2 for them. Microbiology for infectolytics. It is useful to other people, but really useful to a very small number of people in pathology. So they were interested in that information being in I2B2. We put that information in I2B2. So if there are facts and you can point in Cerner, in the EHR at something you want to be in I2B2, come on, we'll put it in. So a couple of key things. So look, there are a pretty large number of patients. We have about 1 million patients with meaningful clinical data in I2B2 and in the Enterprise Data Warehouse. The date range for the Enterprise Data Warehouse is more or less from 2010 forward, because that is the inpatient implementation of Cerner. So that's sort of a watermark of where we have a more robust set of data in the Enterprise Data Warehouse. We have a huge number of visits, a huge number of facts. We're at 404 million, almost 405 million individual pieces of clinical information in I2B2. That's pretty small compared to what's in the actual full Enterprise Data Warehouse. So if your data isn't in that 405 million pieces of clinical data, come ask and we can give that to you too. But for 405 million pieces of clinical data, you can get it yourself in your pajamas on Saturday morning, as long as you're on campus. So a couple of examples, just so for feasibility assessment, this is somebody who's really, they've used I2B2 to really target whether or not they can do studies or not, and not approach studies where they're not going to be successful in recruiting. And because they are able to find these patients, so the 15 patients that she found, we could tell her exactly who those 15 patients were. Instead of having to go through and just hope you get 15 patients that look like that over a year, we gave this person those 15 patients and anybody who meets her criteria and the visit dates for those patients, and they were able to more successfully target recruitment than just going and sitting in a clinic every Tuesday morning. So in grant preparation, and this is some fairly old data, but so I2B2 provided data that they used specifically in putting numbers in the places where the study required it, the application required it to be, and for providing additional population information, and they've incorporated it into a fairly large number of different types of funding mechanisms. And this is just from I2B2. This doesn't include what we provide from the Enterprise Data Warehouse to support these sort of functions. And so this is a pretty interesting one, from data mostly from I2B2, but with a little bit of additional information that we were able to provide. Someone was able to really almost fully do their research just from I2B2 and won first place in a oral abstract. And I think the time frame for doing that was in days and not months. So this is some of the information from the case study. We don't have too terribly much time left.
Oh, we have. It runs till 4:30.
till 4:30. I was thinking 4:15. Good. So nobody chimed in as to whether or not they were actually able to complete the case study. So I'm not sure how much we want to go through specifically the case study and the variance. And my inclination is just to kind of go through and talk about how to figure out the question, because that's really the key of the case study. Is I kind of can't see the details of that very well. So looking for patients with a particular diagnosis. In the case study, it is GERD, and on a particular or not on a particular set of medications. And these are the results that should be pretty similar to what you got if you did the case study. One thing I want to point out that has actually changed, and it's I think it's a good learning example. So proton pump inhibitors is a category. It doesn't specifically say that you want proton pump inhibitors, but if looking through in something like I2B2, if you can see a hierarchy that shows the medications that you're interested in and that they are in a category called proton pump inhibitors, that is one of the values in having that representation of concepts within I2B2, because it allows the user to say, oh, well, what I really want is proton pump inhibitors. I was using these two medications because those are the two that I was thinking about, but yeah, all those others are reasonable too. I'll bump up one level and look for patients on proton pump inhibitors, not just the specific medications that came to mind. Now I'm almost going to shoot myself in the foot here, because the reorganized medications in I2B2 actually doesn't have a category for proton pump inhibitors, because that category is something that is specific to the way UAB and Cerner specifically categorizes medications in multiple codes. I2B2 has been reorganized to really be a more standard from a national perspective, and we're using the VA National Drug File categorization and RX norm codes, which if you are familiar with medications probably should sound familiar to you. And in the RX norm and in the FRT structure, there's not really a category specific to proton pump inhibitors. There are concepts that are tagged for proton pump inhibitors, and so there's sort of trade-offs, and it's a good example of how the organization of the content is important, and really how you frame the question. Knowing what information you're looking for is as important as knowing how to use the tool. And while you certainly won't get the know fully how to use the user interface in I2B2 in an hour overview class, you're certainly not going to know the full clinical data and how things are organized and structured by somebody showing you how to use the I2B2 tool. That requires clinical knowledge, research knowledge, domain knowledge for the area of interest for the investigator. So what I'm going to transition to now is some general information about I2B2, and then I want to go over and actually log in and just wander around in I2B2. But that's going to require people to actually begin asking questions in order to do that. Before I do that, and we'll distribute these slides, there's information available. If you Google I2B2 UAB, you'll find your way to all of this stuff. There's information about how to log into I2B2. There's information about how to request data from our Enterprise Data Warehouse team. There's information about training courses that are coming up, and that is the URL that you can't see very well because it's blue. But there is I2B2 training twice a month, regularly scheduled hands-on I2B2 training. It does require registration, and it is highly recommended that you actually log into I2B2 and use it before you come to the class. it will make the class much more valuable to you if you actually have used I2B2 a little bit beforehand.
You mentioned it's only accessible on campus.
That is correct. I2B2, even though it's not full PHI, it's available outside the health system network, but it does require you to be on UAB campus or to be connected to UAB campus.
What do you mean by connected to?
VPN.
Yeah, so you can remote into your desktop. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. If you are, and that's, so if you're remoted to a desktop or an environment here within UAB, that works. And typically if you're a collaborator, you can, it's pretty common to have a footprint within the UAB campus from a technical perspective. So if you're remoted into something at UAB, you can get in.
Matt, some of the people are students and some are staff. You want to say what the differences are?
Yes, the question was about the differentiation between student, staff, and faculty. So, so without any additional intervention, as long as you've done all of your required training, which is IRB, Human Subjects Protection Training, HIPAA training, and an acknowledgement of appropriate use of limited data sets. If you've done those three things in the learning management system, a faculty member can log into I2B2 without any additional requirements. Students or staff will require approval of someone to be able to log into I2B2. We've not refused anyone. It's really just so that even though it's not full PHI, it does need to be part of a normal, reasonable function, whether you are a trainee or whether you are a staff member. Actually, probably most of the people logging in I2B2 are non-faculty, but it does require a supervisor approval for such things. Any other questions out there?
I have one about the data sources. It's all EHR information, but is study information fed back in?
So there's a question about study information being fed back into I2B2. That is a great question. The answer is not now, but yes. So in addition to the broadly available self-service functions within I2B2, there is in addition to the, you can log in with your Blazor ID and get limited data set data, there's a model that we're working towards where there's a PHI full instance of I2B2. And that would require that'll require login with health system credentials, that'll require being on the health system network, etc. You have to make sure we're on the right footing from a security, privacy, and IRB perspective. But that model is going to include having projects within I2B2 that is specific to individual studies. So if you log into that instance of I2B2 and you are an investigator that has two clinical trials, you would see two projects, one for each clinical trial. Pick the one for clinical trial 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that project within I2B2 would have only the patients who are enrolled in that study. Or if it is a retrospective analysis, waiver of consent, only the patients who constitute that research data set that's IRB approved. And the only people who would be able to log into that study or that project within I2B2 are people who are on that IRB protocol. Now, in that place where you get information on those study-specific patients and only those patients, information that is collected for the purpose of clinical research or study-specific data collection, whether it's in something like REDCap, which exists on campus in a few different places, and is study-specific electronic case report form study data collection. Those things we want to bring into that environment. If it's in the Encore enterprise clinical trials management system, we want to pull those into I2B2. And we're actively working on pulling Encore data into I2B2. And we're partnering with the Department of Medicine to pull information from their instance of REDCap into I2B2. So that is outside of the EHR completely. Data that is collected specifically for the study in those places that would be pulled back into I2B2, married up with all the rest of the clinical data in I2B2 and delivered back to that research team. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
It is. If I'm
The answer was yes.
two clinical trials, is that visible? The goal is to get there.
Yes. And that is within a year. I can't promise it's within this calendar year. It probably is for Encore. It depends on the collaboration with the Department of Medicine for REDCap, but it's definitely on the fairly high on the priority list. Although there are competing priorities, it's get more data into I2B2, and the list of data to get into I2B2 is pretty long. Any other questions out there?
And by what you mean getting it into I2B2, you're talking about those facts that you were describing earlier. What's the typical time frame of a request to accessibility?
There's a question about how long does it take to get data if someone requests additional data that's not currently in I2B2 to get it into I2B2, and it fully depends on the complexity. If there is a particular data element that is in Cerner speak, it's a clinical event. If it is a specific set of those, very, very easy, a week. The next load, probably. If it is more complex and we have to figure out where it is in Cerner, how it's documented, it can be more complex than that. But we're already loading such a large volume of data, and the big bucket structurally of data that we are loading some of but not all of are clinical events and power notes, more or less. Orders. If there are specific orders that you want, no problem. If there's specific clinical events that you want, no problem. If it's detail within power notes, if it is semi-structured or unstructured data, it's much more difficult. But if you can come with a set of clinical events, it is really, really easy to include those in what we're loading. Now I'm going to tell you how to organize them I'm going to ask you how to organize them once we put them in I2B2. And that's where we get to collaborate. Any questions online?
How is this data being warehoused?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit. Can you repeat that?
How is the data being warehoused?
How is the data being warehoused? So in the big picture, so let me see if I can go back to our, can't find my mouse here. Okay, can you see that slide?
Yes.
Okay, so Cerner, our electronic health record, huge Oracle database. Nightly, a subset of that is pulled over into our enterprise data warehouse. It goes from about 4,500 tables, give or take, to about 450 tables, give or take. That is copied over nightly. That enterprise data warehouse is actually a business intelligence platform that's called SAP Business Objects. And so that is a huge Oracle database with the SAP Business Objects, business intelligence infrastructure put on top of it. And so that's really a full-fledged enterprise data warehouse. That's where the EDW teams go and do their daily work of operational reporting, quality reporting, etc. And that's where we go to do research data requests. and where we go to source data for the I2B2 system. So from the enterprise data warehouse, we pull certain things, patients, visits, and individual facts for clinical concepts into I2B2. And so because this is a sort of an informatics seminar, not just a research seminar, it's structurally very different. The I2B2 schema is it's a EAV model, a star schema oriented. So it's a big set of facts in a table in the middle, and every fact is associated with a patient and a visit and a concept. And so, for example, we build our concepts to include ICD-10 codes. We load a fact. That fact is associated with the ICD-10 concept, the patient, and the visit. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yes, that was wonderful. Because I didn't realize that we had SAP business objects in the background.
Yes,
This is
we
great.
do.
Thanks.
So I'm logging into I2B2. So here is where, in this instance of I2B2, there is only available the limited data set. The idea when it comes to the PHI instance of I2B2 or the data mart or project delivery of I2B2 is that you would have multiple things here if you had the authority to see multiple different sets of data. For example, if you are a PI on studies, you may see three projects here. So, I2B2. So I'm going to go pick on someone who just ran a query. I have no idea what this is, but I'm just dragging a query. And this person asks for how many people have this particular ICD-10 code for cardiac arrest and what does that say over there? Hypothermia? So they have dragged concepts from here into one or more of these panes. And you can say exclude these or include these. You can put dates around these. You can add more and more groups to accommodate your query. And as you can see, it's intended to be a very easy self-service drag and drop user interface. You're not going to build a query here that is going to break a database somewhere. You're also not going to do anything here other than count unique patients. So if this says 42,167 patients, it's 42,167 unique patients. It's not visits, and it's not that there are 42,000 instances of those things co-occurring. It's unique patients.
So does everyone have access to other people's query surface?
No, that's just me.
Okay.
I can see other people's queries, but you cannot. So, and this is probably the easiest way when somebody says, what's in I2B2? I go here. This is where you can navigate the hierarchy. Diagnoses is a pretty substantial hierarchy. You can see counts for any one of these nodes. So we have 176,000 patients with one of these ICD-10 codes, P00 to P96. And if you drill down in, you can see subcategories of that. And if you go far enough in, you start to see ICD-9 codes embedded within the ICD-10 code categories. You also see SNOMED codes, which is how the problem lists are documented that are mapped to ICD-10 codes. You don't really see them, but if you want to do a search for IMO codes, which is how in some places of clinical practice problems are documented, So you can see there are 33 patients with this specific ICD-9 code, but there are 176,000 patients with this entire category of diagnoses. Patient details, as I was drilling down into some social history, you can do race, gender, ethnicity, alive or deceased to the extent that the electronic health record knows it. That doesn't necessarily mean that a person you drag over isn't deceased. If it doesn't say deceased, it just means it's not documented in our health record if they're not. Marital status, smoking status, pregnancy status, which is a very common eligibility criteria exclusion. So this is something we calculate every time we do a load in Di2B2, whether or not based on date math to known pregnancy begin dates, we estimate whether people are currently pregnant. And I'll throw out a request. If anyone knows other common eligibility criteria that we can represent within I2B2, bring them on. Well, this is specifically there because we recognize that pregnancy status was something that was a common eligibility criteria. So we also have some data that is not from our core enterprise data warehouse or specifically from the Cerner EHR, particularly the tumor registry. That's actually from our cancer registry system, which is separate than Cerner. But these are patients going way back in time, representing instances of reportable cancer within UAB, organized by site, including histology, morphology information, staging, etc.
So something that's common in the cancer world is if you're going to put someone on a new chemotherapy, they would usually want you to be off of whatever you've been on, a former regimen over some period of time. So either a 4-week or a 3-month window, something like that. Right. Is that easy to?
So the question about specifically chemotherapy and current status of chemotherapy. So that is an interesting question. For looking at the existence of medication on particular visits, yes, that is very easy. You can say not on any one of this category of antineoplastic medications for this period of time. No problem. That assumes that the chemotherapy medication actually ends up as a medication entry within the electronic health record. Chemotherapy is a good example because I know that to have been a gap in clinical documentation, particularly in infusion, I believe, where they may not have always ended up as a medication entry in some places. So I would be interested in talking with you if you know detail about that. I think that is actually resolved. So, but that's one of those things where if the medication exists, then it is very easy to do those criteria within I2B2, assuming that the data actually ends up as an actual medication and not as a piece of narrative text within a note, like a infusion therapy note. I've lost my mouse. So you can also search for things by category. So if you want to search for about gout, you can find concepts by category. And of course I search for something that's going to take a little while. Lack of preparation on my part. So you can look
Matt?
Yes.
This is Kevin Junk and Karen Self in Radiology. Can you expand the radiology folder and show us what sorts of things you're gathering? We've always suffered from the big problem of having unstructured radiology reports. So I'm curious as to see what you've got in there. Is it the actual performance of particular exams? That's what it looks like.
Yeah, and this is actually reasonably new within I2B2, but it is orders of particular status, more or less functionally, meaning that they are orders that are real, that they weren't canceled, that they were completed. So the existence of an imaging procedure is really all that's in here currently. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Although radiology is one of those places, and I just had a very good discussion with neurosurgery, and they're interested in much more from a clinical perspective in the results of analysis of those images. So I actually have it on my list to probably come talk to somebody in your area. Where I2B2 and really where the EDW in general has some difficulty is where things are not structured. So if something, my typical stance is if it exists in structured data within the EHR, I can probably find it. If it is unstructured, semi-structured, free text, then that's a whole different world, and it's very difficult to find patients based on unstructured data. And that's the case whether it's in the detailed content of a radiology read or a pathology report or free text within a power note within a particular clinic, or really any other places where there is either unstructured or semi-structured data. It makes it really difficult to pull that content out and incorporate it into I2B2, but it also makes it just difficult to find patients based on those criteria, even with the full EDW.
Matt, if they searched on the structured data, so that what they want is the reports of the test, if they searched on patients who had a given test, could they then go elsewhere to get the reports? Then they know it's a particular set of patients, they could get that from this.
So there's a question about if there is a particular set of patients that you find based on structured data, and then going to get the unstructured data for those patients, that is a different thing, and that is much more manageable. So for example, if you have 100 patients and want the full text of the surgical pathology notes, we can, if we know the 100 patients based on structured data, we can get the full text of the surgical pathology notes and incorporate that into a data set and deliver that back relatively easily. What's difficult is finding patients based on the content of a surgical pathology note.
But so they could search, the question had been raised whether the difficulty getting radiology reports. So if you said, I want the radiology reports from all the patients who had this radiology procedure on this day or in this month, then you would get that.
Yeah, so she diverted me back to radiology even though I purposefully went to pathology. So the question was, so for example, if we find a set of patients, so there are, let's find a small number, so 83 patients who have this particular radiology procedure done, and say, okay, can I get the radiology report for those 83 patients? And I have to say I'm not entirely certain about that because of where that unstructured data is and how it exists, either within Cerner or within our document repositories. So if it exists in our document repository as a document, then yes, I can pull that text. If it exists within various free text structures within the Enterprise Data Warehouse or within Cerner, and is a document, but really isn't a document, it's a conglomeration of different pieces of information in different places, then the answer is I don't know. And actually, Kevin may be able to say if the actual radiology report is a self-contained artifact that could be, the text could be pulled for and delivered, probably better than I can because he's radiology informatics. You guys are getting a bonus.
Yeah, and the answer is, unfortunately, when we've looked at it in the past, Cerner stores those as blobs rather than as separate documents like your surgical procedure notes and things. So they store the radiology reports differently, and in the past we've never found a good clean way to be able to pull that information out.
Right. And if it's one block for all...
Let me preface that, though. We do have some tools within the radiology applications to be able to search and find those tools. But I think to be able to extract that data and store it into something like I2B2, that's a whole different ballgame.
Right. And so in building up the infrastructure to support the research community and pulling data, obviously we start from structured clinical data. In the Informatics Institute, we also have faculty who are interested in natural language processing, text mining, and concept extraction, information extraction from narrative text and clinical text. So it was not first on the list, but there are a variety of places where we know free text exists, and there's opportunity to responsibly incorporate some of those things into something like I2B2. Now you have to be careful because text is unstructured and we cannot incorporate content that may not be that may be identifiable. And it also means looking at the 10, 12, 15 different ways and places within clinical practice where text exists. And sometimes it's a big hunk of text, and sometimes it's 12 little hunks of text that are meaningfully associated with one another, and how do you really represent those things? So I think the target is to continue to build up the structured data that we pull into self-service functions like I2B2, but also incorporate some things that we can assert from narrative text and some things that we can target and pull out as discrete concepts that we can then represent in I2B2 as discrete data elements. And to the extent that those things, to the extent that we know where they are, that they are consistent, and that we have the time to go find them, pull them out, and build discrete data out of them, there's opportunity there. So we are at the bottom of the hour. Any last minute questions? So I will make a plug to Google I2B2 UAB, go log in, play, and come ask me for data. Nothing will make me happier than lots and lots of people coming and asking me for data. That's what I'm here for.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for being with us in person and online. Remember, those of you online, we've got people who are here, but we need your email address, and I will send you out the copies of the slides and some additional readings on this topic. Next week, I think, I didn't look at the schedule actually, I apologize. I think it's Jim Semino who's going to be talking about terminologies and ontologies. We should be, the information for logging in for GoToMeeting is the same as it was this week. Sorry for the confusion that we had with two different numbers, but it should be the same as this week. And if you get on and you don't hear anything, please email me immediately, because I am here in the room listening to the speaker and watching the email in case anyone's having trouble. So let me know, and hope to see you all next week. Thanks and goodbye.